I'm Charlotte Dennis and I'm the founder here at Curious Consultancy. Welcome to the first episode in our Survival, Awaken and Grow series. A number of short webinars that we've pulled together to help businesses through this uncertain time. We have looked at different themes and there will be 5 in total that we will upload each week. The idea of which is to help business owners, large and small, and also startups really think about what they can do to equip themselves with all the necessary tools to prepare to bring their businesses out of hibernation and into future growth. We've looked at building the series based on experiences from our own careers and also from conversations that we've been having with clients over the years. So we hope it's of use. We've got some free resources that we will upload at the end of each session in the term of links and podcasts and other things that we've found on our travels linked to the titles that we'll be discussing. So today we're going to talk about leadership, as I mentioned, and I'm going to kick off with some insights that I've gained and garnered from my career working with large American brands. But before I go into that, I just really wanted to take a step back and to reflect on essentially what's been going on over the last few weeks. So for you watching this as a business leader, you have probably felt a whole multitude of different emotions, from anxiety through to concern, maybe a little bit of anger. But what we do know is that there is a whole load of uncertainty around this global pandemic and the impact that it's making on business. So if we're going to flip this on its head, when we're thinking of you as a leader and thinking about the responsibility that you have on your shoulders to steer this ship through such uncertain waters, you are the person that maybe many are looking to for answers. You are the person people are looking to for their own job security, when inwardly you are probably concerned about what the future will bring. So what we're going to look to cover in this short episode is really to use our experiences and our knowledge and hopefully give you the confidence to really draw upon some of these resources and really kick forward in what should be to many an uncertain yet optimistic time. So what I wanted to just start off with is to thinking about businesses and how businesses go through different transitions. So during my time working for big American super brands, I've been very fortunate enough to have worked for Coca-Cola, Walt Disney and Nike. And one thing that is very similar between all of these brands is their leadership style and the way in which their cultures invoke this real essence of belief and inspiration, these very powerful environments that just encourage teams to work super hard and to be very loyal, these inspiring leaders that just make you put in your A game. So one thing that we do know from looking at these big brands is it's not always been plain sailing, and whilst we're not underestimating the power of this global pandemic, one thing that we do know is that many businesses go through different transitions. I'm going to borrow a very philosophical opinion from Charles Darwin, so stay with me on this one. But Charles Darwin, obviously, as we know of him, dedicated a great deal of his life and work to the origins of species. And we best know Charles Darwin for the work that he did around the survival of the fittest and the notion that it's not the strongest of the species that survive, but the one that's most able to change and adapt. And within the business world, we borrow this sentiment of organisational ecology to really make businesses understand and embrace change. And again, I'm not belittling this because this is the biggest change that we have faced within our modern world. And we obviously as businesses need to adapt. So I think the first lesson that we need to look at from a leadership perspective is to know that we are going to see change and to embrace it and to encourage our members of staff to also embrace change, because the reality of it is that the same with the origins of species, the species that don't adapt and fail to evolve cease to exist. The MBA corridors and libraries are littered with case studies of examples of organisations who have failed to adapt. So we're thinking of Woolworths, Blockbuster, Nokia. There's lots of examples that we can draw upon to think about how businesses have either pulled back from the brink, Lego being one of them, Kodak being another, to really at the right time and just at the right time to evolve. But businesses that embrace change and see evolution as a natural part of business are going to be the winners coming out of this global pandemic. So it's really important that that is the first lesson that we think about. So obviously we also want to be thinking about our employees and how our employees are going to be feeling coming out of furlough and potentially coming back into the workplace. We also know that the environments in which our employees will now be working in are going to be very different from the environments that they left. Obviously with home working, this is going to be another interesting dilemma and indeed an opportunity for leaders to think about how they pull through this and think about how they inspire their teams to work hard and to dedicate themselves to their job during these uncertain times. So before I go into some top tips that I've learned from my travels working for big superpower brands and also from the years that I've been consulting, I'm just going to kick off with some insights that I've gained from one specific leader. So one of the books that I am going to recommend at the end of this session is a book by an author called Liz Wiseman, and it's called Diminishers and Multipliers. It's a fabulous book, and I have read an awful lot of leadership books over my years, and it's definitely one that I would recommend. So I'm going to introduce the concept of multipliers and diminishers after I've just taken you through this short little insight. But the example that I'm going to use is of a multiplier, of a boss that I feel very fortunate to have come across. Now, my own personal leadership style of building and managing quite expansive teams comes as a consequence of learning from both sides, from leaders that I look to that didn't inspire me, didn't motivate me, didn't make me want to achieve the best I could possibly achieve. And from those kind of leaders, I realised what I didn't want to become, or what leader I didn't want to become, versus the leaders that I've worked with that were the polar opposite, that inspired me, that motivated me, that made me want to come up and turn up for work and do the best job I could possibly do and to add value. And the key component in this is inspire. Now, leaders can lead and followers can follow, but the following aspect of that equation, if you like, is about whether a follower follows because they have to, because they've got a job to do, or a follower that follows because they have belief in their leader. And that's the key thing in this whole equation, is making sure that you invoke a kind of leadership style that encourages others to lead. So this multiplier that I have been fortunate enough to have worked with at Nike came in at a time when there was a diminisher that had just left post, and the team were feeling pretty demotivated and pretty unhappy, not inspired, and certainly were able to do better work. So this multiplier came in when a team was unhappy, at a point where within the Nike brand there was a real switch in terms of strategy and focus, and we were preparing for a pretty significant moment in the sporting calendar. So this multiplier came in and had some stuff to deal with to start off with, and that unfortunately unfortunately there's some redundancies that had to be made as a consequence of this multiplier coming into the role. But if we fast forward 3 months from when this multiplier arrived, and then I fast forward another 3 years to when the multiplier left, the team that he inherited and the team that he left were completely different. This multiplier encouraged his team to take risks. His belief was that if you didn't take risks, then you'd become stagnant and you wouldn't move forward. And with those risks, he would back you if those risks turned out to be failures. And he really encouraged you to think about taking those risks and doing things differently, because the benefits far outweighed the risks that would come as a consequence of it failing. So he taught me an awful lot from that perspective. He injected a lot of fun into the work environment and was very mindful of the just do it ethos, and that's how I describe working at Nike when people ask me is the just do it mentality that exists within the origins of the business, and this is global, and this is again why it's so special that leaders at Nike have a very similar approach to how they lead. The just do it ethos is what we see externally on the advertising campaigns, and that's exactly what it's like, that ability to turn up and change things, do things and move things forward. And it's the leaders within this American power brand that inspire people to be able to do this and to move the needle. And I have to say that this multiplier that I worked with, and I have to admit I did cry when he left, and that's probably one of the only times I have cried when a boss left, but he had such a profound impact on the entire team, and I learned an awful lot. Now, the thing to caveat with this, and Liz Wiseman talks about this in the Multiplier book extensively, is leaders, multipliers aren't necessarily softies. Now, multipliers are people that think about human intelligence and how they're going to make human intelligence obviously breed from one to the other. A multiplier believes that human potential can be maximised, and if a multiplier works to that human potential and really realises the intelligence of an individual, then not only is the organisation going to benefit, but the employees are going to become a lot more loyal. So there is this obviously intuitive reason why multipliers multiply, to kind of think about how they can inspire their team to be a better version. And Liz Wiseman talks about multipliers creating a series of A players. Now, an A player breeds more A players, right? So if you've ever worked in an organisation where there's somebody that's really got it down, that knows their role, that is very insightful, is very informed, and is really moving the needle, making things happen, then the rest of the team improve their A game, right? And through default, then that helps the multiplier to attract talent. So Liz Wiseman talks about a number of things that a multiplier does, which I would encourage you to go away and read, to help organisations thrive. So right now, as we're coming out of this pandemic and the lockdown is starting to ease and businesses are starting to be rebooted, I would just really call upon your leadership to think about how you're going to inspire your teams, and also how you're going to create A players. Because one thing that we do know at the moment, and this is probably a sweeping statement, that leaders don't necessarily want to go out hiring a lot of talent. And what we can now look at is making our teams more resourceful and working smarter. Now, again, in the Multiplier book, Liz Wiseman talks about human potential, and it's implied that a multiplier can double the amount of work capabilities and capacity from an individual versus a diminisher. Because if a multiplier is inspiring their team to work harder and to be more focused, and they really feel that they're turning up and making a difference, then not only are they going to be putting in 100%, but they're going that extra mile. Whereas a diminisher who is zapping any kind of effort and energy from a team, and also a diminisher is looking at how they actually switch down human capabilities. A diminisher is all about, I am the brainiest in this team and you will obey me. And that doesn't work for a lot of teams because people feel that they're not being appreciated. So with this thinking in mind, this is an opportunity for you as a leader to step through and actually empower your team to help you look at these phases that your business is going through, this survival, this awaken, and this grow. And I would also commend you to think that you are, as a leader, not expected to know all of the answers. And again, Liz Wiseman talks in her book about the ability for multipliers to call upon their teams for debate, healthy debate. And actually, if you don't know all the answers, then that's absolutely fine. A leader isn't expected to know everything to solve every problem. And I think it's healthy for you to call upon your teams to help you solve some problems. Yes, it's about making sure your teams feel reassured that you have that focus, but it's also about calling upon the collective community of your businesses to collectively pull through this pandemic. So the next top tip that I've got to share with you is this idea about being focused on your mission and your vision. So at a time when you're coming out of this pandemic, it could be really easy to go into this fight or flight mode, right? This kind of panic stations of, I need to survive, I'm going to survive at all costs. And absolutely that is important. But what I would definitely encourage you to think about is to focus beyond that. Remember your why. Remember why you are doing what you're doing. That shouldn't change. Yes, your strategies and your deployment of your why may need to alter. But what we want to encourage you to think about is to really focus down on your mission. Your mission shouldn't have changed. Your mission should still be the same. Now focus on that and keep focusing on that. And every business decision that you make in the next few weeks and months, remember your why. So Simon Sinek is another of my favourite authors, and he introduces this through his book. Again, we've recommended it at the end of this session. So it's really important that you're thinking about not what you do, but why you're doing it. And within Simon Sinek's book, there is a lot of advice and handy tips. And actually, part of what Simon talks about is this inspired leadership element. So there's lots of examples that Simon talks about within his book of businesses that have gone on to survive and thrive, leaders that have created this fellowship, this community that follows them. And the key theme through all of this is inspiration. So the leadership style that you deploy and you feel is the right one for you, make sure that you're considering how you're going to inspire your teams to grow your business and to reach beyond this. Because what is clear is leadership is your role, but to follow a leader is a choice. And as I said at the beginning of this, we could either embrace leadership as, I have a job to do, so I'm going to follow you, or I really believe in what you're telling me. So I think it's really important that we remember this difference. And I think the other thing that I'd like to introduce at this point is that there's a little bit of a myth about leadership. So you may be watching this and thinking, oh gosh, it terrifies me, the thought of leadership. I don't feel like I'm a leader. I don't feel strong enough to lead my team. I'm obviously feeling all of these pressures on my shoulders. And some people are natural born leaders, and some people aren't. But the good news is that leadership isn't always inherent in us, but it can be taught. So I think that what I would again recommend is, don't change who you are. You can go off and read some of the books and the articles and listen to some of the podcasts that we're offering up that we hope you'll find useful. But you are you because that's your personality type and that's who you are. And you need to adapt your leadership style dependent on, yes, of course, what's going on within your team environment, but don't change your personality. Your personality is your personality. So it's important that you remember that, but also to be in tuned in terms of what your team's needs and wants are and what your business is needing to do into the future. So make sure we're covering that. So that concludes our leadership session. I'm going to hand over to Greg, who's now going to give us some interesting insights into the world of sport, and he's also going to recommend some resources that he's found useful during his time as an elite athlete, a business owner and a fellow MBA student.
Thanks a lot, Charlotte, for introducing leadership so well and explaining why I think this is so important for us right now in what is a very challenging time for lots of people at the moment. And I think, you know, we're all trying to build our businesses so that they're ready to go on the B of bang. And I think having an understanding of how we lead is going to be crucial to how we get people to follow us in whatever our vision might be. I thought I'd stick with sport for this one. I'll bring my business experience in later modules, but for now, I suppose I'll stick with the cliche and stick with that, I guess. I do think this does take a lot of self-awareness, and I appreciate it will be hard at times to really think objectively about how you lead, and it may mean that you have to be really honest with yourself about how well you lead or how badly you lead, but that's okay. We're here to help support you, whichever side of that coin you might be, because we're of that growth mindset that you can always get better wherever you are and you never stop learning. So to start, I'm gonna sort of let you know the number one question or number two question. Number one is always, what's your diet like? I can tell you it's not very good at the moment. The number two question is always, who's your best coach? Now I'm still a professional player, so it's probably best to save that one until I'm retired, or at least put it in my autobiography. But I thought you'd be interested to know that even from studies, players or athletes never say their best coach is their best tactical coach or their best technical coach. It's always the one who cares about you the most as a person, which I thought says a lot. How many of our leaders that we've had have really cared about us as people beyond what we do for the organisation that we're working for? And reality is, I think a lot of us have suffered with poor leadership unless we done exactly what they needed us to do in our workplace. And it made me think, for me, if someone buys into me, I will buy into them. It's just a heads up for Charlotte there. But I think it's really important to think about when you're trying to get people on board with your vision, think about getting on board with theirs as well, and then try and find a way to entwine the two together. It's much easier for you to make someone else's vision come a reality at your hands than it is to try and sell them your vision for something that they didn't really want in the first place. But to take some sort of specific details from one of the guys who I think was one of the best man managers I've had, he had a good use of insight testing. So insight is very similar to Myers-Briggs or Facet 5, and you end up with colours. Yellow, red, green and blue. Yellow, people easily influenced. Red's really goal driven and task focused. Your blues very analytical, data, and your greens very caring. For interest, I'm a yellow red, very equal on both. So really love people, but I'm also incredibly task focused and goal orientated. And it got me thinking when I was preparing this module actually, that we always had this senior leaders group every year. So at the beginning of pre-season, he'd meet, tell us the sort of season vision and plan. And then as a senior leaders group, we'd go off and share that out with the lads. But thinking about it, it was actually incredibly astute in the way that I was delivering it in a yellow-red way. Someone else was delivering it in a very blue way, very tactically, very technically about what skills we needed to improve. And you greens were talking about how the wives and the families and stuff were going to be looked after, which I thought was really clever because, the best coaches don't train all their athletes in completely the same way, but they train the individuals as individuals, which is very, very difficult in a team sport. So how many of you are treating your teams as individuals? Are you managing everybody that works for you completely the same, just in the interest of keeping it fair, which I completely understand? Or do you realise that some of your team have more emotionality or more drive or whatever it is, and you need to provide that for them? Because remember, leadership is about how you get that person further along with the project that you want to do, or the vision that I was talking about slightly before. So I think managing the individuals is really important. But that's, I suppose, the bottom-up approach. But let's think about the top-down approach for the time being. I've never been a director of rugby or a director of sport anywhere, so I'm only talking about someone that has been led by these people. And I think the best emotionally stable guys in these positions have always had this incredible knack of keeping a distance between the pressure that they might have from the board or the owners or whatever and their delivery to the group. So after a game or a bad loss, they take that time before coming into the changing room, and that's even after a win as well, so that you're not getting just hot emotion and reactive feedback. And it sort of got me thinking, how difficult is that in the real world when, you've got deadlines to meet and things are happening very quickly and things need to be turned around. How many of us are taking that time before we deliver to our teams and what we need from them? And then I think it's really important to think about 2020. So far, it has not been the best of years. It has been storm-ridden at the start of the year, and now we're all stuck at home or in our garden rooms until we were allowed to go back to work. But 2020 is the year that the millennials are supposed to be the most dominant workforce that we have. Now we're different, and I refer to millennials as we because I like reminding Charlotte that I am just a millennial. But I think I did quite a bit of research on this for my MBA, that the best type of leadership that suits millennials is cloud leadership. Cloud leadership is where you have an almost open door policy. Now, of course, you have your tasks that you need to get done, and that is blocked off time or whatever. But let's think about what millennials need and who they are. Really high intense people, highly driven, very high need for feedback and counsel. And they don't intend on staying places for a long period of time. Portfolio careers are going to become a lot more common. So thinking about those needs of millennials, being able to think about those facets of a millennial, not as a weakness, but use them as a strength. So Charlotte will tell you, I'm incredibly ruthless with if we've stuck to a deadline or we need something to get done, I'll chase her. I'm very intense to get things done, but I do need her to tell me I did a really good job. And I do need her to counsel me and help train me of how I'm improving and show me my career path with her. But she's cleverly used that to use all the strengths of all my intensity, all my high need for counsel, because I want to improve and I'm desperate to become more educated or whatever it might be. And she's suddenly got someone working at a 10 out of 10 for however much I am, but just in a controlled manner. So I think it's really important that we think about managing individuals as individuals, but let's think about this new generation that's going to be coming into the workforce or is already in the workforce in its abundance, and how we can leverage that to our advantage rather than being frustrated with the fact that these millennials were brought up like this. That's what we're like, that was what we expect. So let's use it as our advantage, and it's a great way of getting yourself talent that other people aren't prepared to manage properly and are quashing those gifts that they might have instead of just adapting their leadership style. And I suppose a final thought on this is probably the other side of the same coin. I am a sports guy, and like the rest of the world, I've been watching the Michael Jordan documentary on Netflix, The Last Dance. And there's a quote in there that he says that leadership comes at a price. And he was saying that because he wasn't particularly well liked. I don't know if that's a fair thing to say, but he was incredibly hard on his teammates, very driven. He trash talked them in training and he would push them. And all of them are interviewed on the thing that were just like, if we got it wrong in training, we were in for it with Michael. And it was a tough environment to be in. But he said, I earned the right to lead my team like that because they knew I was never asking them to do something that I hadn't done or wasn't prepared to do myself. And I suppose that really spoke to me in that I'm very aware that lots of what I'm talking about it can be seen as quite sort of airy-fairy and a bit fluffy and happy, cuddly, whatever. But if you're putting the work in, it's completely acceptable to expect your teams to be putting the work in as well. And I would strongly encourage that. And I've just got a note down here actually of some of the best books and podcasts and TED Talks and stuff to listen to. The best books, without a doubt, the three big ones that I would recommend is number one, Simon Sinek, The Infinite Game. It will change the way you think about how you've started and want to lead your business, and that will change how you want to lead it. And Leaders Eat Last, his second out of the 3 books, is great, and that's much more about building people up. The second, Bob Iger, now the chairman of Walt Disney Company. He was the CEO at the time of writing his book. I think it's called The Ride of a Lifetime or The Journey of a Lifetime, one of the two. And there's loads of great anecdotes in there about his journey, leadership, and in the back there's probably 100 great little snapshot quotes about how to get people to follow you, putting the work in, all that sort of stuff. And genuinely a really, really good read and very interesting as well. The last great book I'd recommend is That Will Never Work, the story of how Netflix got started. And their big thing was about freedom and responsibility. So the way they started was, we got the, however many most brilliant people, talented people, a ton of juicy problems for them to solve, and we just let them get to it. They had the freedom to do it however they needed to, but the responsibility to do it in the right way for the company. And I think after reading something like that, it will really make you think about creatively solving problems as well. There's tons of good TED Talks that I can recommend as well, but probably the one to definitely go to is Ray Dalio. His book Principles is great, but it's bigger than the Bible, and he's a big one on sort of how meritocracy wins. And in the world of finance, that's not really well heard of, that someone in the post room can have just as much input as the CEO. But it's a fascinating read or listen or watch, or however you want to digest any of Ray Dalio's stuff. But I really hope that was helpful. I hope that some of my rugby experience has sort of triggered some thoughts in you. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love you to have a go at some of the exercises that we've set you. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.
Thanks for listening, and join us next week for our next chapter.